today and your people tomorrow. And Mr. Speaker, with that, I'll say 3 times, God please, God please, God please continue to bless America, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the gentleman from California, Mr. Germonde, is recognized for 60 minutes as a designee of the Minority Leader.
Mr. Speaker, before we start on our dialogue, I expect to have my colleague from New York here in a few moments. I want to thank my colleague from South Carolina, Walter Jones, North Carolina. Walter, well, let me put it this way, Mr. Jones, every day and every week you speak on this floor about the Afghanistan war and previously about the Iraq war. And you carry a message that is extremely important, one that I agree with, and one that I would hope that our colleagues here in Congress would take up this issue in a very strong and determined way to bring this Afghanistan war to an end. I thank the President for bringing the Iraq war to an end, and now there's yet another task for all of us to do, and that is to end this continued use and abuse of the American soldiers. They endure much, and it's time for us to bring them home. We thank them for their service. We see them as they return. Some of my colleagues and I are working on a major effort to try to deal with more than 365,000 of those men and women that have returned that are suffering from post-traumatic stress syndrome, dealing with everything from suicides to depression and other issues as they return home, and many of them still in the military dealing with those issues. We also have the traumatic brain issues. And so there's much to be done, and there'll be much more to be done for those that are currently suffering. And the longer this war in Afghanistan continues, the more men and women will be suffering from all sorts of medical, physical, and mental issues. So, Walter, thank you so very much for what you're doing here on the floor, day in and day out, and reminding us that it's time for us to end this war. What I want to spend some time on today is really talking about America's middle class. The middle class in America has suffered. For the last 25 years, the American middle class's circumstances have stagnated, and in the last 5 years, actually 6 years, have seriously declined. We've seen this in the statistics. We've seen them in the economic statistics. The only way the American middle class has been able to sustain its economic position has been for both husband and wife or children to join in providing the income for the family. It's no longer a single person income sustaining the American middle class. It is about our policies here on the floor of Congress and the Senate that has led to the decline of the American middle class. Specific policies have been enacted over the last 2 decades that have hollowed out the opportunities that the American middle class has counted on. Specifically, manufacturing in America. Once 20 million Americans and their families were in the manufacturing sector. They enjoyed a good salary. A good hourly wage was available to them, such that one individual in that family working in the manufacturing sector was able to support the family, own a home, take a vacation, buy a boat, provide for the college education. That's not the case today. Only 11 million and a few thousand beyond that are actually engaged in manufacturing in America today. So what happened to the 9 million? They lost their jobs. Those jobs disappeared, not from the earth, but disappeared from America. They went overseas. They were outsourced. American jobs were outsourced. Why? Well, they'd like to say it's simply the nature of the free market system. And indeed, that's part of it. But that's not all of it. A major part of it had to do with specific tax policies and other manufacturing industrial policies that were enacted by Congress and remained on the books for some 20 years or more. We need to address that issue because if in fact it is the policies of this Congress and previous Congresses that have led to the great outsourcing and the decline of the American manufacturing sector and along with it the American middle class, then there's something that we can do about it. We make laws. We establish policies. And if we find that there are policies that are contrary to the good ability of American economy to prosper and the middle class to prosper along with it, then we ought to change those policies. That's what the Make It in America agenda is all about. The Make It in America agenda is specifically designed to rebuild the American manufacturing sector. This is an issue that's been taken up by the Democratic caucus, led by our minority leader, Mr. Hoyer, Minority Whip, Mr. Hoyer, and carried on by my colleagues and I. So we're going to talk a little bit about that, and I noticed that my colleague from New York, Mr. Tonko, has joined us. And Mr. Tonko, we were going to start out on health care, but we kind of morphed into the issue of the American manufacturing industry and the role of the middle class. Now, the middle class, I went off on manufacturing and the need to rebuild that and the Make It in America agenda, but also a key part of the inability of the American middle class to sustain itself is health care. And the Affordable Health Care Act, which the Supreme Court recently confirmed was constitutional, is a major effort on the part of the Democratic Congress and President Obama to provide not only health care, but to lift up the American middle class. So let's hold for a moment the issue of Make It in America. We'll come back to it in the latter half of this hour. But let's take up the health care agenda, which I know you wanted to speak to initially. While you're doing that, I'm going to run and get a couple of placards that show what it is we're talking about.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Garamendi.
Mr. Tonko from the great state of New York, part of the East-West team.
There you go. Always a pleasure to join you on this House floor. And thank you for leading us in this in a very important discussion this evening here on the floor. It's important for us to recognize that for our business community to compete and compete effectively, they need to be able to contain costs. They need to be able to have predictability and stability in their day-to-day routine. And I think that the Affordable Care Act takes us toward those goals. It is a predictable outcome. It enables our small business community to have a sound and well workforce. And I know that that is in the ether of the mindset of our business community. They know a productive workforce begins with the soundness of a health care plan. And we are the last industrialized nation to have come to the table to begin to resolve that dilemma, and it has held back our business community. What we will have with this important Affordable Care Act is the opportunity for exchanges to be developed, either along the state line or in a national setting, that enables us to provide for the opportunities for business, and to do it in a way that is vastly improved over present situations. Status quo, just about everyone agrees, would not cut it. It is unsustainable to continue with a system of health care delivery that we currently operate under. So that this, I believe, will be welcome news for our business community, they will have the opportunity to address this dilemma, which has found the business community, the small business community, to paying anywhere from 18 to 20% more than industrial settings, and getting reduced services or a smaller bit of service package than the industrial setting would get. So this allows for better services at reduced premiums that will enable them to have that affordability factor addressed, and to go to the marketplace with that in an operational motif is going to be, I think, a very strong enhancer for the competitive edge of the American business community. So, you know, underpinning, supporting the small business community is important, because, as we know, it is the driver. It is producing the great majority of new jobs in the private sector in America today. And if we can take that outcome and enhance it by addressing an Affordable Care Act that impacts soundly and progressively and positively the small business community, then we're doing something to increase America's growth in jobs. And we do it also by having the ability to provide for various tax credits that go toward the small business community, especially for those that are 50 and fewer employees. So we have seen what an economic engine the small business community is. Since time beginning for this nation, the small business community has been that pulse of American enterprise. It has been that predictor of soundness, of job creation and economic recovery. And if we treat the small business community with the respect and the dignity and the assuredness that it requires, we have done something, we will be doing something. So, Representative Garamendi, I think it's important to understand and outline that the Affordable Care Act is the beginning of providing that foundation for the small business community to have a sound workforce, which is essential in this very competitive sweepstakes for jobs and landing contracts in that international scenario where we all compete for the right to serve the general public.
Mr. Tonko, I'm really pleased that you brought that up. You reminded me of a rather lengthy article that was in the Sacramento Bee. I am from California. Sacramento's one of the hometown papers. So the Bee was writing a major article on the exchange. In the Affordable Health Care Act, there is an insurance exchange. And California was the first state in the nation to follow up on the Affordable Health Care Act's exchange portion and put in place a law to build an exchange. Now, at least our Republican friends think that's an awful situation. Governor Schwarzenegger, who was a Republican and is a Republican, signed that legislation before he left office almost 2 years ago now. So California, this article is very effusive and upbeat about the establishment of an exchange, that they expect to have it online. And what they talked about, a lot of it was about individuals who could get insurance in a large pool and have the same opportunity for a reasonable price policy as occurs in a big business. But they also spent a lot of time talking about small businesses. And how correct you are that the Affordable Health Care Act really offers small businesses an extremely important and heretofore unavailable opportunity to get insurance for the employer as well as for the employees, and a very big subsidies available for those companies those small companies that choose to buy insurance. Up to 50% of the cost of the insurance could be subsidized and the cost reduced to the employer. Now that's a lot of money. It's calculated about $4,000 per employee if you're looking at an $8,000 or $9,000 policy. So it's really an important opportunity. Why is that good for business? Go ahead, Mr. Tonko.
Well, I was going to say, too, many people will say, well, if the option is made available, which it is,
yes,
why would they choose that? Why would they want to spend, even if there's a tax credit made available? Well, think about it. The sound business community leader is going to want to recruit. And when you recruit and get the best employees, you offer the best package, and you have, as a result, a soundness in your workforce.
Exactly.
So the management style is driving that sort of benefit so that you will reach to the program so as to recruit and retain quality workers. And so that I think that driving element will influence more than anything. And then the tax credits will become part and parcel to that package, which, as you suggest, can be as great as 50%. This is a huge cost savings and a sound policy to which they're attaching. Well, so I think it's a benefit.
Well, absolutely true. In addition to that, because of the exchange situation, an individual as well as a business finds themselves in a large pool. Now, I was the insurance commissioner in California for 8 years in the 90s and then again in 2000, 8-year hiatus in between. And I understand that in insurance, for it to work, you need a very large, diverse population so that the risk is spread. An individual market today, you can't get that. But in the exchange, the concept is to allow all of these individuals and these small businesses to be part of a very, very large pool. And they can take advantage of the spreading of the risk and therefore the lower cost and the subsidy on top of that. One more thing, I was at a bagel shop. You know, it was early morning. I needed a cup of coffee and a bagel. And so I stopped at a bagel shop, and there were the owner and 1 or 2 employees. I think there were actually 3. One was in the back. I didn't see that employee. But we were talking about health insurance. And there was an excitement by this employer because she could get insurance. So it's the employer as well as the 2 employees that were going to be able to get insurance. Previously, she couldn't. A single mother with a new shop, opening it up, pretty good bagels, and the coffee was very good. Now she could get insurance, and through the exchange, and, you know, new shop, income was going to be low. She could also get the subsidy. For the first time in many, many years for this woman, a divorcee, lost her husband, divorced, husband went one way, she went the other, lost the insurance. Now she can get insurance. This is part of the Affordable Health Care Act, and it's specifically designed in a way to encourage businesses to provide insurance, and in that process, as you say, find the good employees and keep them. It's very exciting.
If I might add, I know that we want to get into talk of job creation, but if I might add some of the dialogue that's been developed in the district that I represent, and I'm sure it's not unique to the 21st District in New York, but people's mentioning the fact that if you have, and again, there's this proliferation of small business that has been the driving force that has really built our economic recovery from this painful recession. But what you'll hear time and time again is, if I'm a small operation of 10, 15, 20 people, one person, just one person in that workforce impacted by catastrophic illness will throw the actuarial science into a frenzy. And that means that your premiums will be adjusted in a way that makes it difficult as the employer to continue to afford that insurance or to have the co-payments from the employees. So as you're suggesting, if you enter this large collection called an exchange where many more numbers than 10, 15, or 20 work in this concept together, it shaves those peaks. And the shock, the premium rate shock that is dulled, is a good thing.
Well, let me take that a little further. I wish I had this law when I was insurance commissioner. Because I used to see this all the time, where I'd get complaints. We had a consumer hotline, and we would take several thousand calls a week. We'd always get these complaints about, they dropped my insurance. And we get it from businesses. They dropped my insurance. Well, why did they drop the insurance? You said it right on target. Suddenly, one of the members of the workforce, small group of people, had a significant illness. It came time for the annual renewal. I mean, insurance is an annual thing, renewed every year. Oh, I'm sorry, we can't renew you this year because, well, we're changing the market. All kinds of excuses, but the reality was there was one sick person in that group. So this law will tend to end that. There's also the opportunity for people that have become unemployed in this economy to get a job, particularly if that person happens to be 50 years or older. That person today has a pre-existing condition called age. they're beginning to enter that part of life where you're going to have more and more medical issues, and employers go, oh, well, wait a minute, we don't have a position for you. We're not discriminating based on age, but your resume isn't exactly the way it ought to be. It's very difficult for a person 50 and older to get back into the workforce because of health insurance. Now, with the exchange and the anti-discrimination policies in the Affordable Health Care Act, which we call the Patient's Bill of Rights, they will be able to get back into the workforce. So we're talking about people going back to work. Insurance, health insurance, no longer being a barrier to employment.
Well, Representative Garamendi, you cite a very awkward dynamic that can be used as a pre-existing condition, that being age. How about gender? There are more and more small business startups that are female-owned, women-owned businesses. Women, again, working in a small business situation as the employee. A pre-existing condition, being a woman, gender penalizing. So there are many aspects, and the pre-existing condition is something that's getting more and more attention, especially in the weeks that accompanied the decision, the pre-decision of the Supreme Court. A lot of recognition of what was in the Affordable Care Act, pre-existing conditions now being denounced and not being allowed as a reason, a rationale for denying insurance, are a big prime aspect of the progress made here. And as I've said in my district, is it perfect? No. We aim for perfection. We achieved success. And we will continue to work on this order of health care in a way that will continue to build the progressive nature of the outcome.
Well, these are all part of the puzzle of putting people back to work. And as I started this discussion, talking about the laws of America, the policies that have been enacted by this Congress and by previous Congresses, and the way in which they impact the middle class of America. That impact has been devastating on the middle class for the last 20 years, and it is our determination as Democrats to change the policies so that the American middle class can once again thrive, so that a family can enjoy the fruits of their labor, so that they can enjoy the potential that America brings to them. I notice that we've been joined by our colleague from Ohio, Mr. Altmaier. Please join us. Thank you for coming in this evening and sharing with us your thoughts.
I thank the gentleman from California, and I was listening to the discussion, as I often do, and I wanted to bring a perspective to join that discussion as you were both talking about health care, Mr. Speaker, as they were both talking about health care. And I, as one who did not support the health care bill originally, I do think it's important to recognize, as has been happening in this discussion, what's working with regard to the health care bill, what's already been implemented that's making a real difference in people's lives. And the reason I did not support repeal of the health care bill, both times we brought it up, was because I have the fourth most Medicare beneficiaries of any district in the country, 135,000 Medicare beneficiaries. And many of them are caught in the donut hole, what we've come to know, that gap in coverage in the Part D prescription drug program. We are now entering the third year of the phase-in to completely close that donut hole. Already, people who are in the donut hole have received a $250 compensation for coverage through the donut hole. They're getting a steep discount on brand name drugs, and moving forward, as I say, in the years to come, they're going to completely close the donut hole and get coverage all the way through. That's something that would not have happened if we had repealed the health care bill. Small businesses all across the country that struggle with the skyrocketing cost of health care that's affecting every family and every business in this country, they're getting a tax credit to help offset the cost, to provide coverage if they choose to their employees. That's something that's making a real difference in the district that I represent. Being able to cover people up to age 26, often recent college graduates struggling in the down economy. We're talking about the job market today. The parents' plan, being able to take for a short period of time those young adults after they've graduated school and maybe in transition in their life or in the job market, That's making a real difference for people that I represent. And people with pre-existing conditions. Children today, beginning in 2014, adults will not be able to be denied coverage because of a chronic health condition. That's something that's long overdue in this country. And those are all things that have been implemented. They are in the law today. They're taking effect. They're impacting people. And we can't overlook that. The legal issues have been decided. This is settled law now. And what we need to do is make sure, especially with the Medicaid ruling, which was not talked about as much because the court focused on the mandate, but with the states being able to opt out on the Medicaid side, we have to find a way for health care providers to be guaranteed coverage for people who come to their door, whether they be a hospital, a physician, long-term care, whatever it may be, because when the health care bill was put into place before it became law, the deal that was made in return for universal coverage, covering people in this country, was the providers, all those provider groups I mentioned, gave a little. They understood they had to take some cuts to help offset the cost of that, the cost to the government and to the taxpayer. Well, now the court has said that states can opt out of part of that through the Medicaid program. We need to make sure that those health care providers are able to keep their end of the bargain and that the government keeps their end of the bargain by finding a way to cover everybody. So I did just want to add that perspective. Again, as someone who didn't originally support the bill, there are things that are working and have been implemented, and I commend both my friend from California and New York for having the discussion tonight.
Well, thank you very much for joining us, and thank you for bringing that perspective. Twice now our Republican colleagues have voted for a full repeal of the law, and you very correctly and I think almost totally pointed out the things that would disappear. The donut hole would open up again. The pre-existing conditions, the Patient's Bill of Rights would be gone, and insurance companies can then re-engage in discrimination as they have so often. All of those things that are very, very positive would disappear. And so we're fighting fiercely to keep them, and as Mr. Tonko, our colleague from New York, has said, we will work through the years ahead to improve and to deal with the unknown issues that are certain to arise. And so we've got work out ahead of us, and we can do it. Mr. Tonko?
Yeah, just wanted to speak to the issue that Representative Altmaier raised with the donut hole. Such a sweet label thrown onto a hidden attack onto our senior community, asking them to dig into their pockets when they hit the threshold of $2,930. All up to they hit the threshold of $4,700. I can tell you painfully, heart-wrenching stories that many of the seniors that I represent, and again have a huge proportion of seniors in my home county of Montgomery County, New York, and many will reach that threshold early in any fiscal year. And it's a phenomenon with the prescription drugs. Those prescription drugs are their connection to quality of life. It's not only keeping them well and healthy, it may be keeping them alive. And there are far too many stories, again, heart-wrenching stories of people who will cut their prescription or their pills in half so that they can balance their budget. That is not the way to respond to their medical needs. They are told by their physician what that prescription drug intake is to look like for their wellness or their getting well. And we ought not cause them to be pushed to the brink where they actually adjust their intake of prescription drugs just to meet a budget. So this closing of this donut hole, making prescription drugs more affordable, where we finally in 2020 close it completely, I mean, people have realized already billions of dollars of savings. 5.3 million seniors have received $3.7 billion in savings. Is that something you want to take away? So when this House, with a majority, the 3 of us obviously said no, but when the majority said repeal, why? What's the replacement? We didn't hear replace, we heard repeal. And it left many stunned in this chamber because the progress just begun to be tasted was attempted to be pulled away, and it's regrettable.
Well, we heard many, many things during that debate last week that are just, I think, incorrect and inaccurate. One of them was that the Medicare program was cut and benefits taken away from seniors. It didn't happen. What happened was that about $50 billion a year of expenditures going to the insurance industry unnecessarily, an unnecessary bonus was removed. That was about $160 billion, about $16 billion a year. And then there was the Medicare fraud. That is a big problem, and other adjustments, but no reduction in benefits to seniors, and in fact significant increases. Mr. Altmaier talked about those with the drug benefit, as you did. There's also the prescription drug savings, which Mr. Altmaier you raised. We also know that every senior now has a free annual health checkup, which is an exceedingly important way of keeping seniors, well, anybody, healthy. You get a checkup. We've got blood pressure issues, diabetes issues, other kinds of medical issues. You get ahead of them, and then with the drugs, you can keep ahead of them. So there are many, many improvements in the Medicare program that are a result of this bill. Mr. Altmaier, I know that you've been spending a lot of time on these issues, and I thank you for your participation here tonight. So if you'd like to expand, maybe some experiences in your own district, and go for it.
I appreciate the gentleman opening the door for that discussion. And you know, health care is just one issue facing American families in the country today. And I know this group that meets periodically when we're done with session to have these discussions, as I'm sure both of my colleagues do, Mr. Speaker, I hear from people in my district after these discussions show up on people's TVs, and I hear from people all over the country, in fact, that are saying you need to continue talking about the job market, continue talking about infrastructure repair, something we've talked about at length, talk about health care, talk about issues facing small businesses and working families in America, because that's something that I think gets lost in the politicization that takes place in a presidential election year. We're starting to head towards that time of the year when politics trumps everything. And it's unfortunate because what gets lost is these are real people, these are real Americans that are suffering in the job market.
I just noticed in our gallery two gentlemen, soldiers, who are here, both of them wounded in the wars, and this is part of a group that comes in here every day when we're in session to watch what we're doing. They just stepped out the door, and I wanted to catch them before they left to recognize them for the services that they provided. They may come back in which case I'll interrupt you again, but please go ahead.
Absolutely. Well, I would agree. I had a chance to chat with them earlier today, and there is no group that should stand ahead of our nation's veterans when it comes time to making federal funding decisions. So I'm glad that they're joining us today.
They are coming back, and I just want to, maybe the three of us can simply recognize them for the service that they provided to this country. I suspect that normally, and I see a gentleman that's always escorting them here in the gallery, normally they come back with some wound or another, and that's difficult. But I want them to know, and I'd ask you to join me in this conversation, to know that this House, Democrat and Republican alike, are determined to make sure that all of our men and women that are returning from the wars and those that have served, even though they were not on the field of battle, deserve both our respect and whatever services they need, veteran services, medical services, and a job. So I thank them for coming here. Mr. Tonko.
Yes. Thank you, Representative Garamendi, and let me also thank our military, our active forces out there as we speak who are defending us in some very far-off places, deserted deserts and mountains that extract great courage and commitment to this nation and her cause. And, you know, again, so many veterans returning are looking for work. It ought not be a battlefield in their homeland to find a job, and it's why the American Jobs Act makes it possible for businesses to realize benefits when they hire our veterans, when they hire the active military that are returning. And that's a commitment that ought to be understood by all of us. That's a commitment that should be part and parcel to unanimity in this House. And let's go forward with something like the American Jobs Act.
Well, this is one of the very few, in fact, this is the only thing that's actually been done. When the President last September proposed the American Jobs Act, the second thing that he talked about was the Veterans Job Bill. And it kind of languished around here for a couple of months. It was early September when the President spoke, and then came this special day every year called Veterans Day. And all 435 of us, we go home and we go to the Veterans parades, and lo and behold, we came back and we found compromise. And we found bipartisanship, and the Veterans Job Bill actually became law shortly thereafter.
But the full package could have been done,
yes,
which allows for even more opportunity for our veterans. If we're hiring police officers and firefighters and educators, teachers, we're building the fabric of the nation and the infrastructure, the human infrastructure that's required to educate our young, protect our neighborhoods, make certain that we're there in response efforts when tragedy hits. These are the things that can also, in a broader sense, affect positively the employment factors for our veterans. And that full package offered the greatest hope. And the fact that we would nitpick and that we would be pushed to pressure points and finally acknowledge the work getting done is not the way to achieve what we know has to happen out there. We've seen the growth, Representative Garamendi, of private sector jobs. 29 consecutive months of private sector job growth, well beyond 4 million jobs. Wonderful number, but still a lot of work to do when we think of the Bush recession and the loss of 8.2 million jobs. And now people want to take us back to those failed policies that saw us losing as many as 800,000 jobs a month and say that's the way to move forward. That's moving backward. We need to move forward with efforts like the American Jobs Act.
Mr. Tonko, before we carry further with the American Jobs Act, I know that the two veterans that are here in the gallery were headed out the door when I saw them leave, and I wanted to thank them for their service. And I suspect they were headed off to some other meeting or wherever they're headed, and I don't want to keep them here, but rather just to thank them for their service and to know that 435 members of this House care deeply about your situation, what you're dealing with, and all of the others that are in the field and have returned and providing the extraordinary service to this nation. So thank you very much, gentlemen.
Yes.
We are,
in fact, very proud of their efforts and very proud of the training they endure to be able to be the greatest force on the globe.
Exactly.
And we thank them for that.
The American Jobs Act had many, many pieces to it, and this is one of the great what-ifs. You know, one of the woulda, coulda, shouldas. What if back in September this House had actually taken up the elements of the American Jobs Act? There was, I think, almost 250,000 teaching jobs that were in this piece of legislation. There was also almost the same number of police and firemen and public safety officers in the legislation. It didn't happen, and so I know that in my daughter's and son-in-law's own school district, there have been layoffs because of the economic and financial circumstances of the state of California, and class size went from 22, 23 to 33, 34. An extraordinary burden on the kids. And when you're in the second or third grade, you never get a chance to go back and repeat. That's a lost year, and that'll carry through perhaps all the rest of your life, that you miss that opportunity to really advance your education. Just on the educational side, you go, whoa, what if we had another 280,000 teachers in the classroom across America today? How would that advance the well-being of our children? And I think it's very clear. They'd be far better off, far better off. But it didn't happen.
And Representative Garamendi, you're offering a very powerful statement, a powerful challenge, the what if. But when you take that statement and the failure to commit to our nation's children and then contrast that with what's happening in competitor nations, where they're investing in education, investing in higher education, investing in research, investing in advanced manufacturing, these are the challenges that are facing us as a government, as a body, as a House of Representatives. And if we do not respond accordingly, we're holding back a nation. We're actually pushing us backward. This discussion here in this House ought be about moving us forward with progressive policy and investment of human infrastructure.
So the President also talked about building the foundation for tomorrow's economic growth. This is the infrastructure of the nation, a big word, but one that I think most Americans understand as being the roads, the bridges, the railroads, the sanitation systems, the water systems, the research, the schools. Wow. We delayed, I guess, all of us in some respect, but really the Republicans in this House controlled this, the transportation bill. Delayed the implementation of the reauthorization of the transportation bill until the middle of the construction season. Just 2 weeks ago, we actually passed a two-year transportation authorization program. Very, very important and very beneficial. But what if that had happened last September? We lost half of a construction season, and states and localities were unable to plan and put in place the projects that they needed to put in place because of the dilly-dallying and the delay that went on here. We'll take some of the blame on our side, but we don't control the legislation. It's controlled by our Republicans here, and ultimately they were unable to even put a bill out. The Senate did put a bill. I thank Senator Boxer from California, the lead author on that, and the minority leader in her committee. Two of them came together with a bipartisan bill. It finally got done. We're thankful for it. But the President wanted to go beyond that. He wanted to establish an infrastructure bank, one where we could literally invest some public money, some private money, and go about building projects that have a cash flow, like a toll road or a sanitation plant or a water system where people pay a fee and there's a cash flow, so that we could really build the infrastructure of this nation. But didn't happen.
You know, Representative Garamendi, as you're speaking, I'm thinking of those golden moments in our history, replete with those statements made by the nation, this nation, of investing, especially in tough times. Now, you know my district. I've described it several times. It's the confluence of the Hudson and Mohawk rivers and the donor area to the eastern portions of the Erie Canal. In very tough times, DeWitt Clinton Governor Clinton proposed
Now, this was the governor
system
from New York, not from Arkansas.
Right.
Okay.
Right. But proposed a canal system in tough times, saying we need to invest our way through this. There's a way to grow a port out of this town called New York. And there's a way, perhaps, that there will be a ripple effect, which there was, with the birthing of mill towns, a necklace of mill towns that became the epicenters of invention and innovation. And it drove a westward movement so that it headed toward California. It drove an industrial revolution, sparking all sorts of opportunity and activity, driven by a pioneer spirit that is unique to this nation. And our stories, our collection of stories, of journeys to this nation with people embracing nothing but this noble dream, an American dream that transitioned a rags to riches scenario. That's what it's all about. It's us in our finest moments. And why not today, as we have these inordinate needs, to invest in the people, invest in jobs, understanding the dignity of work, underpinned by the effervescence of the pioneer spirit that is, I think, part and parcel to our DNA. It is within our fabric as a nation to have that pioneer spirit. We're denying it. We're denying that spirit.
Well, you just talk about history here, and actually your governor, DeWitt Clinton, really did lead in a major infrastructure project. Now, California was the gold rush. It's very interesting. You go back through the old writings, and the folks from the east, New York and around, traveled up the Erie Canal to the Great Lakes, to Chicago, and then from then on. And they also left, and these were my relatives, left the port of New York, which was built as part of the infrastructure, to travel to the Panama and then across the Isthmus of Panama, and then up the coast of California. So my own relatives took advantage of those two infrastructure projects that you talked about. However, your governor was building off some of the work of the Founding Fathers. Now, a lot of talk around here that there's no role for government in the economy. Well, George Washington disagreed, and his Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, disagreed. And they had a debate with Jefferson, who thought that we ought to be an agrarian state, and George Washington and Hamilton thought that there was a role for industrial and for manufacturing. And so George Washington, in his very first days as president, told Alexander Hamilton to put together an industrial policy for America. And there were about, I think, 9 points or maybe 12 points in that industrial policy. One of them was build the infrastructure, and specifically said canals and harbors. So this goes back to the very beginning of our country. What the President wanted to do and what us Democrats want to do is to build the infrastructure, the foundation upon which the economy grows. And we can do it. We can pay for it, because every dollar we invest in the infrastructure immediately turns around and develops $1.75 of growth in the economy. So it's not money down a rat hole. It is money that builds the foundation and then expands the economy immediately. It is the very best way to put people back to work immediately, together with education.
And you know, the reach that we ought to make to our history, to let it speak to us, the reach we ought to make to the boldness that we embraced in times that preceded us, ought to speak to us, ought to feed our soul, ought to feed our mindset. The courageous steps that we were asked to take, that we took together as a nation, committed to a cause, this is the sort of leadership that I think is required. The President is asking us to respond in very challenging times to these orders of investment. Now, I can tell you, in my district, birthplace of the Erie Canal, mill towns that have achieved and changed the quality of life of peoples around the world. We're watching nanotechnology, semiconductor science, advanced battery manufacturing, a growth area, chips manufacturing, a growth area happening within the capital region of New York, all built upon, I think, a public-private sector partnership. Government inserted in a way that provides for the priming of the pump, that goes where you absorb risk, which perhaps the private sector won't take. And we're now seen as a global center of operations in certain areas. And it's growing and it's expanding. Now is not the time to walk away from that progress. Now is the time to invest in these dreams, these American dreams that people have always seen as the nobleness of the American saga.
I want to just pick this up. I do want to come back to our manufacturing policies before we wrap up here. But before we do, just to pull together the American Jobs Act that the President proposed back in September, folks, it did not increase the deficit. The program was paid for by changes in the tax policy of the United States. Policies that the President continues to talk about today, that we eliminate the tax benefits that go unnecessarily to the oil company, the oil industry. Some $5 to $15 billion a year of subsidies going to the wealthiest industry in the world. Pull those back. And the extraordinary low taxes that have been available to the super rich, the top 1%, and restore those to the Clinton-era tax and other tax proposals that he had made, so that the proposal was fully paid for, not decreasing the deficit, but rather putting people back to work, creating the jobs that are necessary to move the economy and to get the American middle class back into the game so that they can prosper and so that we can rebuild those American manufacturing jobs. The 9 million jobs in manufacturing that were lost between 1990 and 2010. And keep in mind that over the last 29 months, there has been private sector job growth every one of those 29 months. And so when people say, no, no, it's not good, say, it's not good enough, but at least it is happening. Men and women are going back to work in the private sector. The public sector continues to lose jobs and continues to shed jobs. But on the private sector job side, in part because of the policies we've been talking about here and the inherent strength of the American entrepreneurial and business spirit, people are coming back. Not as strong as we want, but if the American Jobs Act were in place in its fullness, we would be moving towards a more balanced budget, reducing the deficit, and putting people back to work. We're not there yet, but we've not given up on this, and one of the major pieces of this is what we call Make It in America, because manufacturing matters. I know in your district you've been talking a lot about this Mohawk Valley and about this great history. I'm not going to let you continue on without saying, hey, I'm from California, and we know entrepreneurship, and we know about the next generation of jobs and the next innovation. But New York still is there, and we'll vie for you for the best in the nation.
Absolutely. You know, and I see the order of progress, Representative Garamendi, that we've achieved in that private sector that you just outlined. And it's regrettable that the solution for which the President is calling to provide for the public sector side, which would speak to greater numbers of employment because we've taken that 4 million plus in private sector and reduced the overall results by losing some public sector opportunities, which speak to soundness of community, public safety, educating the young, providing for, public protection out there. These are important aspects of quality of life. They ought to be embraced. So we've denied part of the President's agenda. We've recognized the success and strength of part of his plan, but there's been this partisan divide. There's been this holding back on progress because, perish the thought, if the White House should look good in this comeback from a recession. Well, we need to place the public good, the nation's good, ahead of partisan divide. Absolutely essential. And, to then criticize the President by restraining some of the progress that he's trying to cultivate and saying he's not cleaning up the mess quick enough, well, that was a huge mess delivered just before he assumed office. 8.2 million jobs is a tough situation from which to walk forward from. And I think that there is a solution there, and we ought to work and put America first, the needs of this nation first, so as to be able to continue the walk forward and not negate any of the progress that we're achieving.
Let me pick up one of the issues the President's been talking about recently, and we actually worked on this more than a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, and that was the tax policy. At the outset, I talked about policies, tax policies being one of them. American tax policies until December of 2010 actually allowed and gave to American corporations a tax reduction, a tax break, when they offshored jobs. Send a job overseas and reduce your taxes. Hello? How could that be? I don't know where it came from, but that was the law of the land until the Democrats, then in control of Congress, pushed through a piece of legislation that ended $12 billion a year of tax breaks for corporations that offshored, sent jobs overseas. I will just note, parenthetically, that not one Republican voted to end that extraordinarily damaging tax proposal that rewarded companies with lower taxes when they offshored jobs. Not one Republican voted to repeal that law. However, the Democrats stood together, the President signed that, and it is now the law. There's still about another $4, $5, maybe $6 billion of tax breaks that companies get when they offshore jobs. We've been working to eliminate those, and the President talks about it very often. He also talks about something that we should do, and that is to reward the onshoring of jobs. When companies bring the jobs back home, they should receive a tax break. When you want to send jobs offshore, you should receive a penalty and certainly ought not receive a tax reduction. Now, that's good public policy. Hasn't happened. We don't control the House of Representatives, and all tax bills have to start in the House of Representatives. So we keep pleading with our Republican colleagues, please, please, give American corporations a tax break when they onshore jobs and end the remaining tax breaks for offshoring jobs.
Let me tell you, that is welcome news to my manufacturing base. I hear it all the time. They support the efforts of the President to reward those who produce jobs here in the U.S. and where we provide benefits for returning jobs, onshoring them, as you suggest. That is welcome news. That is welcome news to the manufacturing base, as is the call for action by the President for investments in advanced manufacturing. And I know that to compete and compete effectively and to allow for job growth to come via the private sector base, we need to invest in that new day of manufacturing. It is not dead. I refuse to submit to this notion that manufacturing is dead in this country. It is alive. It is well. It needs to be retrofitted so as to be advanced in nature, in character, and let's get moving forward and let's again reward those job creators, not paying people to offshore or send out of this nation. Our hugest export was jobs in the decade preceding this administration.
You talk about reward and about tax policy, as was I, and let me give you another one, and I know that you and I are working on this together. Tax policy. Right now, we Americans provide a tax credit, tax reduction, for those who put up solar programs or wind turbines. The thing is, that's our tax money. The question is, where is it being spent? Being spent on American-made equipment, or is it being spent on foreign-made equipment? All too often, that tax money is used to, or those tax subsidies are used to purchase foreign equipment. This piece of legislation, which I'm working on together with Mr. Tonko, H.R. 613, basically says that if you're using our tax money, for example, the Highway Trust Fund tax money for buses, trains, or building roads, then you must spend that money on American-made equipment. Similarly with solar and wind, if you're going to get a tax credit, if you're going to use American taxpayers' money to build something, then it's going to be made in America. We're going to return the American manufacturing by using our tax money on American-made goods and services. Mr. Tonko, we're nearing the end of our time. Why don't you take a run at wrapping? I'll get the last 30 seconds.
Absolutely.
You take the next 90 seconds.
Let me do this quickly, Representative Garamendi. We're the greatest nation in the world. I believe our greatest days lie ahead of us. Let us take our golden moments in history when we were faced with heavy challenges, where we responded accordingly with the belief in the worker, belief in the American way, the pioneer spirit, and did it in an order of investment. Let those solutions-oriented moments speak to us today. We need the soundness of solutions, we need the respect for the American worker, and our greatest days lie ahead. It's a spirit of optimism that we should embrace, a history that ought to challenge, feed us, and inspire us. And with that, I thank you for leading us this evening.
Well, Mr. Tonko, thank you for joining us this evening, and I thank our two gentlemen from the armed services who were here earlier. And yeah, our best days do lie ahead, and it's about public policy, it's about the entrepreneurial spirit, and it's about America's desire to be the best. We're going to make it in America. We're going to make it in America because we will once again make things in America. We will rebuild the American middle class. It's about policy. It's about the spirit of America. It can be done and it will be done, and we're here to see that it does get done. Mr. Tonko, thank you for this evening. Mr. Speaker, we yield back our time.
Thank you, and the Chair will remind all members that it's not in order to bring to the attention of the House an occupant of the gallery. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from New York for a motion.
Yes, I move that the House stand adjourned.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Accordingly, the House stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow for morning hour debate.
Today in the House, members voted to authorize funding